Hey Collective, it's Alan coming to you with a very particular video that will be just for the YouTube audience. This specifically centers around a pull I've been feeling on my energy relating to a feeling of either being stifled or a growing sense of censorship, and the difference between the two that I feel my soul is asking me to kind of address from having to have had to work through that myself along my own journey. And essentially what I was feeling is people getting to a point within their own evolutionary ladder and in their ascension process where they are learning the lesson of what it is to be tempered and kind of the drawbacks that come with that particular phase of evolution, which basically centers around the idea that just because you've found a truth that speaks to you does not always necessarily mean that it will transfer to other people. And that sometimes along the evolutionary process that we all go through, we are tempered into learning what it is that is to be said and what it is to be held back, and kind of the dance that comes with that particular type of juxtaposition. And one of the things that happens along that period is that people can kind of get into a feeling that, spiritually speaking, that there are like laws or things that govern our universe, whether you believe it to be a simulation, whether you believe it to be multiverse, whether you believe it to be an augmented reality or just God-given mental creation, that you sometimes find yourself at odds with laws that seem to kind of tell you what can be said at the moment and what cannot be said to it. And what I was being asked to do was kind of address it directly. And so what I wanted you guys to kind of think about, if you're feeling that stifled sensibility, is to first understand the difference between being stifled, feeling like you're somehow not allowed to say something, or maybe you shouldn't say something at that moment, versus being censored. So the topic of censorship is very specific, especially right now with everything going on in our world where so much cancel culture and so much censorship is going around. If you don't agree with me, I'm going to do everything I can in order to stop you from speaking your truth because your truth threatens my sensibility. That type of mentality, dictatorship and so forth. People who think their shit don't stink suddenly want everyone else to bow down to their way of life. And so it creates a dynamic that's very unhealthy where people feel literally silenced, like they'll be attacked from whatever political group or whatever the little subsections are within each demographic, that they can come after you because of your freedom to think for yourself and to speak on your own behalf. That's censorship. Spiritually speaking, though, there is an aspect to the ascension process which has to do with learning the lesson of when to hold your tongue, because you do not know whether the audience that is listening to you is going to be receptive to what you're about to say. And the importance behind that temperance aspect to your evolution and how it differs greatly from the idea of censorship. And what I felt I was being pulled to speak to was to understand that sometimes when you say things that you find truthful may not necessarily register well with the person that you are speaking to. And part of spirituality is learning to gauge the audience and to know the room as you enter it. And kind of the grace that comes with evolution and this particular type of mentality, and how it tempers your personality into understanding that there's a time and a place, and that sometimes there's an audience and sometimes it's the wrong audience. And to realize that what you may be feeling as a sense of stiflement may actually not be a sense of stiflement altogether, but actually just your guides or whatever you believe your higher self to be, telling you and nudging you to realize that maybe the truth you're holding, the population is not ready to hear yet. And kind of the dangers, let's not say dangers, kind of the nuance that comes with an evolutionary model. For example, if you are a deeply spiritual person, the importance of this particular phase of your evolution, of learning when to say something and when to hold back, is super important, especially if you are working with a lot of people who are more analytical or scientifically driven. Someone who is exceedingly well versed in Bible study or in spiritual studies, speaking in that vernacular to an audience member who is very scientific and completely opposite of that would not be beneficial to either side of the equation. It would actually create more walls than it would do in breaking them down. And the same can be true in opposition, right? Someone who doesn't have a very well developed social skill set may not be the best person sometimes to parlay information from a very, very high frequency, from a very analytical standpoint, onto a different demographic that may not think the way that they do or may not see the world the way they do and is more conditioned to the social norms. And so The person who comes across very direct or very analytical can sometimes not have the honey flavor that is needed and can come across more vinegary. And so it can leave a bad taste in the mouth of the other person. So what I was supposed to speak to was the importance of that grace and understanding the purpose behind it in a way that doesn't make you feel defeated or that doesn't make you feel stifled, but that helps you understand the purpose of decorum and to help you understand why you're being tested in some of the ways that you might be being tested. Because a lot of our population right now is coming to terms with things not being exactly as they thought it was, and they're running against dogma. And so some people, the sense of stiflement is coming from their needing to branch out away from whatever they were raised in because it's no longer healthy or viable for their own soul's development. And so that's a different type of frequency from then those who are even more spiritually evolved, who are learning the value to grace and understanding the place and timing of where certain information should be shared and why it shouldn't be. And I'll specifically use history as an example for this and the purpose behind why this particular piece was going to be a standalone moment for YouTube. If you think back over history and you look back throughout the history of humanity, one of the things that we have learned the hard way is that truly evolved spiritualists who are here to somehow change the system or to somehow add something on behalf of a higher power, sometimes when they go in full, like guns blaring, have had very dire consequences and have been persecuted or even burned at the stake, beheaded, and so forth like that. And so over time, the natural evolution of things would imply that we begin to develop an ability to know the environment that we're speaking to and to gauge the audience in a way that not only benefits you, but that will benefit them. Meaning, just because you're a mother or father and you are trying to help your child doesn't mean that you don't know that your child may not be willing to hear the truth you're giving them because it's not somehow settling well with who they are or where they're going. And so you wasting your breath would actually create more of a chaotic situation or create a bigger wall or hurdle to overcome than if you just would have learned to bite your tongue in the situation, listen very clearly to where they are on the evolutionary ladder, and then find a way to still parlay that information in a tempered sense that would allow the person not to cringe or to retract from you, but rather be open to what it is you're saying in a way that doesn't harm you or them or the dynamic between you. And so when you feel that sense of not knowing when something is appropriate or having been burned one too many times, understand that you're part of a lesson plan within the Academy that is helping you gain the wisdom to understand your audience and to know when to say something. And it's super important, especially for those of you who are very spiritual at this time, who believe in the Aquarian age coming in. You have to understand, or that you should understand, you don't have to ever do anything, but you should understand that there are different grade levels within the Academy and different departments that people fall under. Some people are more of a hayoka, which is a comedic expression of satire, which is usually politically aimed or somehow purposeful in their parable that somehow triggers the other person through humor to look at society in a different lens. Those are called hayokas. Or if you're a mystic, you would understand that mystical things are more dreamlike or more in the etheric realm, and so you learn to speak to an audience through that verbiage. Or if you're a scientist, it's very practical, grounded into the 3D dynamic, and you understand that what you're saying will need to be backed up with physical hardcore evidence. Whereas if you are a spiritualist, you are now broaching subjects that venture into the blending of philosophy and spirituality, and your verbiage and tonality will mirror that as you speak. But notice that each of them have their own function and fall under their own heading. And the way that they speak to their audience is specific to that frequency that they are made of. And so learning your lane is super important in understanding why you sometimes feel a little bit more stifled and sometimes why you feel a little bit more free. Your soul tribe is a freedom pass. It's the ability to speak freely about what you think. It's the perfect blend between philosophers and spiritualists. When they come together, there is a camaraderie to their expression and to their unity that allows them to speak candidly. But if you're not a philosopher or a spiritualist, Speaking down to someone in order to get your point is kind of the biggest problem that you can face. And so learning sometimes just not to say anything to start with is usually the most beneficial for you, especially if you are a change maker. How do you then acquire the skill set needed to learn how to use the right verbiage for each audience member, if not having to go through the pain and struggle of saying the wrong things at the wrong times, and learning the value to temperance and the patience that goes with the development of one's evolution? And so, though I can understand from our larger concept of humanity and the collective consciousness that there is a lot of censorship going on, I understand that spiritually, if you're facing a hurdle, it may just be cautioning you to look at it from a different perspective so as to glean or gain a better sense of how to approach a subject that doesn't alienate the people that you're trying to serve. And that's a super important aspect to the evolution of humanity, right? We are very accustomed to individuation. In fact, we couldn't be more individuated if we tried. Everyone's so focused into the world being all about them that they forget the fact that they are part of a larger structure which is within a larger canvas, which is a larger universal law. And so they get lost in the individuation to such a degree that sometimes it takes the spiritual guides, if you will, or elders or masters, whatever you believe in, or God, it takes you a little bit longer to deconstruct the person into an understanding that just because you have the light bulb go off doesn't mean that the way that you are expressing it would be beneficial to help anyone else have a light bulb moment, right? It's the value of true decorum. It's grace incarnate. And it's a skill set that takes quite a bit of time to develop, but this should be looked at from a standpoint of a blessing converted from a lesson. Meaning, you sometimes have to stick your hand in the fire a couple times to realize how bad it burns before you finally understand the value to why you shouldn't have been doing that anyway. But instead of looking at it from a standpoint that you shouldn't have been doing it, you might want to look at it from a standpoint of why you're being cautioned around moving around the topic as opposed to directly approaching it from your particular lens, right? Remember, not even two twins, identical twins, do not share the same life experience. In fact, they make different choices, they marry different people, and have completely different outcomes more often than not, even though they are identical. So one of the things that I'm being told specifically to share is my own pathway of how I learned this process and why I still struggle with it even to this day, is because just because you glean a truth doesn't mean that it will be true for another person. And if you don't take the time to study the other person, not to be manipulative, but to understand where they're vibrating and where they're starting from, then you will lose the audience before you even got in there, and then you find yourself in drama. It's a really great methodology in order to bring a lot more drama into your life that could have been avoided if you had just learned the value of temperance, of grace, of learning that if someone isn't directly asking you for a particular response from yourself, then maybe it's not the right time for you to just originate it. No one likes a smart ass, no one likes a know-it-all. So know sometimes that if a person hasn't directly asked your opinion on something, it may not be the right time for you to share it because no one asked you. But if you find yourself reading something that is just specifically enlightening to you and you want to shout it from the rooftops, understand what rooftop neighborhood you're in, and will there be any value or will it bring more of a detriment to your cause? And that's a fine line and it's a dance that we as spiritualists learn over time. So though I do see that there is a great deal of censorship going on, specifically with the larger demographic and the narrative being so corrupt and being so agenda-oriented, understand that there is a huge difference between feeling stifled because you're being taught how to operate within a multifaceted system versus being told what you can say and what you can't say. There's a huge difference, right? Decorum is just tact. It's training you how to be tactful in your approach in a strategic and analytical manner that begets the best floral arrangement, right? That brings the most blossom from your creation. Whereas censorship is very dogmatic and it tells you what to think, when to think it, and where to put that stock and information and what whatever it is. It tells you specifically, it takes away your freedom. But with the stifled approach to it, you realize that you're not losing any freedom. You're learning how to use your freedom effectively. And I just felt like the elders and masters wanted me to specifically remind us all of that right now, so as to not get confused and to feel boxed in your pursuit of liberation. It's super important for us to remember to remain grounded into the earthly plane and just remember what history has taught us and the value to why we're being tempered and why there's something called divine timing, right? Because one of the things about divine timing is it relies heavily on the word patience, which, if you guys know me by now, know that in and of itself, that word triggers me like no other word on planet Earth. I fucking hate that word, but it's true, right? With patience comes mastery, and with mastery comes grace. And with the grace, you reach a lot more people more effectively. And there's something beautiful in how you choose to use your words once you've tempered your emotional and analytical states and balanced it into a harmony that then is transmuted through your voice. It's something that people register spiritually. It's non-offensive. It's not telling somebody what to do or what to think or how to behave. It's just bringing some form of light to something that may be either a little complicated or something that could be a little bit dark, right? The shadow nature being revealed by a person sharing their personal journey is so non-offensive to the listener that they're more likely to glean information from your presentation because you're not personalizing it on them. It's not a projection. You're sharing your own sense of self and your own journey. But notice the variation in cadence and the importance to that moment where you do go through the process of feeling a little bit stifled because you're learning the value of when to hold this. The tongue, has the ability to be worse than a bullet if aimed in the wrong direction. And to an unexpected ear that did not ask your opinion on something, it can come across very, very harmful or almost attacky when your intention was just trying to be of service and to just trying to be a friend. But again, if someone did not ask your opinion and you are originating something that you find a great deal of value in, your presentation is everything. And if it's not in alignment, then understand that it can be seen as an attack or it can be looked at in some form of derivative that has a negative connotation and kind of defeats the purpose of what you're trying to say from the get-go. So what I was supposed to specifically speak to was the process by which I learned the value of this process of learning grace and learning when to hold my tongue and why it's so important. And so I just wanted to share it from the perspective of being a spiritualist who has an unusual task of being a person who is very intuitive and receptive to a great deal of information that I glean through books and study, and that I'm not married to any one house of spirituality or any one philosophy, but instead am a student of the academy itself and kind of the shadow nature that we all work through as we blend it together and walk these halls as we do in the Great Earth Academy in the physical form, that then has an ability to ground the energies that bring evolution and bring a higher sense of purpose and reason to us all. So it's a very analytical but very lofty perspective on life. But I've learned that it is my own personal quest. Just because I am totally turned on by the idea of understanding why the sun and the moon have such an effect on humanity and how we play a part in the great cosmic scale and the orchestration of everything that goes on. That is a personal interest that I find very viable and very beautiful. But notice that I don't necessarily always speak to that. Instead, choosing very carefully topics and points of interest that I can illuminate my own personal experience in a way that may open a door for someone else. But I don't usually go in with an outcome in mind. I've learned that the best medicine for most people is sugar. And just being your natural, effervescent self and living your authenticity brings a lot more people towards you than if you go in kind of on the aggressive side. And it reminded me of, like, have you ever seen somebody that you greatly admire, but who has a bit of a temper? Or someone who has an egoish nature that needs to be right sometimes, and so will clap into a situation that it's seeing play out in popular culture before it's actually even made it into trial, and can kind of get into the belief of, oh, well, I told you guys this would happen, I'm right, neglecting the fact that something hasn't even made it into the court system yet, and it still hasn't even been brought to trial. So your involvement ahead of time can be detrimental to your cause, because even if you're right, the audience is still very aware that your ego is driving the chariot forward. Your ego wants the attention that you foretold that something like this would happen, but in truth, the jury's still out. We don't know what's actually being alleged in certain situations, and we have to hold our tongue in order to then not bring a bigger crisis towards us by the possibility of actually being wrong and being a part of the clans that wrongly accuse an innocent person. So that is a tact mentality that has to do with knowing when to say something and when to approach a subject, because you have gleaned enough information of your own accord to speak to it. But again, it's through temperance. It's the temperance process that is super important for us as spiritualists to truly understand and to kind of come to grips with. Because you may see things as being an obstacle, like you may study under the Rosicrucian order, or you may study under Templars, or whatever there's so many different avenues that all speak to a higher calling or to a higher purpose in life for humanity. But you can understand that there are reasons why some of the things that you may uncover or that you may read may not be for the general masses, because the general masses may not be ready for it, or more to the point, may not be interested. Again, going back to my own personal way of looking at the world and the value I've learned to knowing my audience and to only sharing things that I feel passionate about or that I feel specifically called to speak to, because I seem to have an ability in my own mind, at least, to say things in a way that's non-offensive, that honors everybody at whatever stance they are in evolution. And I don't speak down to anybody, and I don't try to convince anybody of anything else. It's a very non-egoish expression of it, but that I do register within myself sometimes, where in the past, when I have predicted something, my ego would knee-jerk me into saying something because I was like, I was right. It was a validation point. But it reminds me of something that Missy says over at the Truth Water Heals Tarot, where she says, a lion doesn't say it's a lion. They just are a lion. And if you need to say it, then you aren't a lion at all. And I remember specifically thinking when I heard her say that, I'm like, it's true. Wolves aren't the only things that dress in sheep's clothing. And it's a very important lesson that I learned across my own journey, which basically speaks to the fact that if you are truly spiritual and you're truly trying to evolve beyond your shadow nature, then one of the biggest obstacles you're going to have is your own ego's need to be right. Because even though you're thinking that it's just a validation from the universe that you were correct, your need to bring attention to it destructures where your intent was actually coming from, and it breaks down the validity to what you said, because you're letting something of a lower part of your nature say basically, look at me, I was right, as opposed to, oh, okay, so I'm going down the right path. Let me follow this a little bit more before I say anything, because I feel like there's something I might be missing, right? One of the things that we learn over time, specifically as spiritualists, it's super important to our journey, is to allow other people to have their own journey, right? Me speaking to a spiritual principle that is outside of a Catholic person's perspective or purview is not going to be beneficial for me to engage them on that conversation, and nor would it be for you. You're not trying to change someone else's perspective on life. You're trying to force them into understanding that we are more alike than we are different. So the more you allow the other person grace to have their own faith structure or their own belief system, the more that you can engage them in a way that actually uplifts humanity and serves your actual higher purpose, which is what we all believe we're here to do. Right? As we evolve, we are taught that we want to share what we know, but you need to share it with people who are open to hearing your message, and to not go around trying to make people buy into your experience, because they may not be either as evolved as you are, or they may be more evolved than you are. And so learning the value to the stifling syndrome, which is what I call it, where you suddenly find yourself in different subject matters or things that may be almost taboo, you have to learn that there's a reason why they're taboo. You have to understand what it is that you're actually fighting against. Are you trying to make yourself notable? Are you chasing notoriety by breaking a truth out to the world? Or are you trying to serve the universe in a higher consciousness type of way? Because they're very distinct pathways that are very important to the evolution of humanity. I'm not throwing any shade to somebody who wants to be noted for being really, really spiritually adept. But the truth is, most spiritually adept people, going back to the lion, don't say they're spiritually adept. They don't need to. It's just in how they present the information. And it's the value of having evolved through the phase of the ego, and it having been broken down and almost destroyed in order to humble you into finding the value of just speaking your own truth in a way that does not offend or go against someone else's principle. I can't tell you how many times I have in recent days had really wonderfully, beautifully uplifting conversations with Catholics or with Protestants or with different people of different departments and different houses. Because instead of talking to their specific denomination, instead of we've talked about is the value of faith in general, the belief in a higher power. I call him the great architect, you call him God, and breaking bread with each other in a way that reinforces the faith structure or the belief in something higher than yourself, and the ability to then carry that forward is a unifying aspect instead of focusing on where we are different, right? And I knew in those situations, because I've been tempered, and the value of why I'm saying this to you all, is I knew intuitively and instinctually what I should say and what I shouldn't in a way where I didn't even think about it. It didn't cross my head. There was no need for me to try to kind of finagle a conversational point, and if I disagreed with something someone else said, it didn't bother me. It didn't faze me, because I honored them in order to honor myself. And that is the true blessing to tempering and to the stifled approach, right? Yes, we're here to change things for the better. But the only way to change things is to have people see the truth kernel underneath whatever the controversy is, and to find a way to approach it through wording and presentation that allows them the ability to have an aha moment, or to have a moment where they genuinely go, oh, I never thought about it that way. And for whatever reason, that non-offensive, non-intrusive approach allows the other person to kind of suspend their own belief system for just a second and go, aha, oh, you know what, I never, yeah, that I guess that kind of makes sense. I mean, that's not what but it opens a door that would have been closed to you no matter what, had you not learned the value of learning when to hold your tongue. So what I want to say as I conclude this will be a very short video because I'm just getting home from work, and I just want to eat and then kind of veg out for a little bit. But what I want to say about this is, one of the great things about the idea that we are in a school, in the earth of being an academy as opposed to a prison, is that you have the ability to ask the universe questions if you know how to word things. And I want you guys to really think about what I mean by that. And it has to do with your approach, which is both as above, so below. It has to do with learning the value to decorum and understanding that you can still parlay the exact same question or the exact same information to specific energies throughout the universe in a way that will get you the answer that you seek without you being sharp-tongued about it, right? Because as personal attestation, I can tell you that I went through a phase where I was very accusatory. When I discovered something or I found something unjust, I would be very accusatory towards the universe and to anyone that was kind of involved in it, about like, well, why do you let this happen? You know, blah, 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 blah. And so there was always like a sharp, there was like, I'm a crab, right? I'm a triple Cancer, triple Leo. So I had claws and I had claws. And so that approach didn't go very far. But after a certain amount of time, I softened my approach with not only the universe, but the people around me in a way that honored them to respond to me in their truth without me being judgmental of it. And what it was specifically being taught the importance of when to hold your tongue and how to say things, right? That's one of the things that we're taught spiritually and religiously, is know the value of the word and understand how you use the word as even more important sometimes than what you're saying. It has to do with how you deliver a piece of information to another being or another energy that can then register and respond to it in the right vibration so as to give you the answer that you seek. And so it's the basic same principle. So even though some of you may be feeling a little bit stifled because you feel like you just haven't found your audience yet, or you're finding yourself feeling like you're being taught when to hold your tongue, understand that there's a great deal of value and substance to gain from that moment in your life. Because the more tempered you are, the greater distance you will travel, and the more you will accomplish along your journey. It's the difference between a glib leader and a honest leader, right? An honest leader will say things like, I honestly don't know the answer to this, but here is my personal belief system I'm just going to share it with you. You don't have to buy into anything I ever say. In fact, find your own path and your own truth, because all truths are but half-truths to someone else. But here's my understanding of this. And then engage them from what they're... But you see what I'm saying? There was a question. There's a communication that's being exchanged between two people that want to engage the conversation. And it takes time for you to find those people, because so many of us want to be right. So many of us want to have our name on an idea or a breakthrough, when the truth is it's a cosmic process. It's something that happens over time. It's the evolution of our collective consciousness. But the only way for the consciousness to evolve is that they need to find ways in order to break down the barriers that divide us, in order to remind us all that we are much more alike than we are different. And the only way sometimes to do that is to be tempered, spiritually, physically, and emotionally. To learn when not to have a knee-jerk reaction, or when to step back from a conversation that you know may trigger you, until you can silence the trigger into being able to address it in a much more diplomatic format, right? There's a reason why leaders are leaders, right? There's a diplomacy there that is naturally occurring to a very well-evolved soul. And part of the process is going through that journey of feeling a little bit restricted or stifled, because you're having to learn a new skill set that will make you free, right? It's a very specific... Sorry, I had candy. It's a very specific process that teaches you not only diplomacy, but it teaches you specifically decorum, and it teaches you grace. And that's an incredibly valuable lesson for those of you who are working through the process. So just because you feel slightly stifled at the moment, understand that there might be a higher purpose to why you're encountering this particular set of circumstances. Are you actually being stifled, or are you being blessed by being trained or taught the value to how to be an even higher level, higher achieving type of leader? Because a leader who learns the value of decorum and learns the value of authenticity can move mountains for other people. They can reach people that no one else can reach, because they're not going after a specific outcome. They're just trying to be of service. Their will is to be good towards humanity. And that registers very differently to other people than someone who is knee-jerk reaction, egoishly driving a need to be right. Remember, one of the great things about being in the academy, and where I kind of really want to leave this message, is understand that the value to the school, to the academy, is when you're wrong. It's about being wrong and having the responsibility and the balls to say, hey, I was wrong, and to be honored by the fact that that means that you can course correct at any given moment. And the value of how you pick yourself up, or how you carry yourself from being wrong forward, is really indicative of your leadership style and your ability to move mountains for other people. Say that you're up for a big promotion, but you are a little insecure about your particular methodology and how you go about things. If you go towards the topic point aggressively, or you go towards it from an insecurity, the other person will feel that, and will either feel it as disingenuine, or will find it somehow a falsity. And if you come across that way, then you've already lost the war. The same can be said for most of things that have to do with conscious leadership, or change leadership, or any type of true momentum changing within society. Is that you need to have the skill set and the ability to lead from the heart in order to register someone else's heart. Because where does emotion come from? It comes from either the ego or the heart. And so if one heart is speaking to another from a very solid, valued place of honesty, authenticity, and just trying to work the puzzle together, there's a natural camaraderie that the other heart will register. And it will be less offended. It won't feel attacked. It won't feel like you're trying to convince them of anything, but rather that you're trying to just meet them at where they are. And so there's a dialogue that naturally happens, almost like a friendship naturally forming, between the camaraderie of being in the search of an answer that you both are on the quest to find. But it comes from learning the value of what it means to be kind of, okay, yes, you have a perspective here. And yes, your perspective might bring a lot of value to other people. But if you don't learn how to approach it, then what good will you be in your bigger life purpose, in your own soul's evolution? Some of you, whoever sees this, might actually have your own empires. Some of you may be kings and queens of your own domain, either now or in the future. But you're going to get there by learning the value of the difference between stifled and being censored, right? Censored is complete removal of freedom and being told what to think, when to think, and how to think. That's censorship. That's not freeing. That's imprisoning another person into agreeing to something that may not sit well with them. Whereas being stifled a little bit, spiritually speaking, is in the right perspective from the right lens, nothing more than teaching you the value of what it is to hold your tongue. Because again, don't ever believe that your words can't really wound another human being, right? What is cancel culture and what is the overswing of the emotional bullshit that goes on with people that are like super all worried about emotional intelligence as opposed to bringing balance to all the intelligences? It's the swing of that. It's the edge to that. It's being bullied into doing. You see what I'm saying? But what's the difference between someone being bullying someone else, with just the fact that they're just using words to hurt another person? The same can be said for anything you approach. So learning the value to holding your tongue, knowing your audience, engaging what it is that you're trying to say, why you're trying to say it, and what's the best approach for each audience member that's there is going to be your best vessel in order to ascend the madness much more effectively and in a way that really, really aligns with your higher call. So for those of you who register with this, what I'm going to basically end it with is this. There's nothing wrong with being wrong. And there's nothing wrong with sometimes leading with your ego. If it's driven by passion, I get it. But if you're feeling stifled, are you being stifled within yourself because of fear? Or are you being cautioned to reapproach the subject in a different lens or from a different vantage point? Because your audience may not be receptive to your approach. If you can differentiate the two, then you are growing exponentially within the spiritual community because you are learning something that takes people eons to learn. So if you ever feel stifled, but you're talking about the universe and you're engaging with universal principles and the law of one and all that stuff, to understand that the universe may actually be answering you by not answering you. And that's super important, right? Because if you ask something with an edge, then you may not get an answer at all, and that may be indicative that you need to reapproach the subject. Again, teaching you the value to choosing your words wisely. So sometimes when you feel like you're a little stifled spiritually speaking, understand that you may not be stifled at all. It may just be that you're being cautioned to find a better mode of operation because you may be losing something in the way that you are projecting it outwardly. I hope that helps anyone who needed to hear that right now. You guys have a great night. Bye.